Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this recording of our In Conversation with Andy Hargreaves and Allison Skerrett, which took place on the 22nd of March. Unfortunately, we had a slight technical difficulty with the recording and the introductions have been missed. We pick up the recording at the point where Andy is replying to the following question. Do you see a conflict or tension between the principles of ethical leadership and a corporate focus on outcomes? I hope you enjoy the rest of the session. Thank you.
Because it sort of gets into what Allison was describing about, students who were weak or need to be pitied in a way, but students who are most at risk, I suppose. So your values collectively are the compass that you use to find your way through everything that comes up operationally. Of course, doing that in practice is much harder than just saying that now. But the job of, if there's a big leader in the room, then the job of the leader is to make sure always that we stick with that. Allison.
Yes, to all Andy said. I would add to that, Andy, drawing from your work on ethical leadership, this dimension of empathy and how that runs across all levels of the school system, from teachers in the classroom who are working with students who are, because of their circumstances, have varying sort of responses to how they can be present, both physically and intellectually in the classroom, to teachers themselves who are facing their own sort of struggles and the demands for how to teach in a time when there's been a lot of interrupted schooling and are concerned that their students are they're not where they hoped that they would be at this time of the year, and to school and system leaders who are thinking about how to support the system and school leaders moving forward. In my work, I also am in the role of Director of Teacher Education for our college at the University of Texas in Austin. And so this is something I've had to learn how to practice. I'm still trying to practice at every level. So when I'm in meetings with the dean about our teacher education program and the plans we're making to revise curriculum, yes, I'm thinking about the equity dimension of what the curriculum actually offers, but I'm taking an empathetic stance on the committee that has been working on this and how much we've been able to do and proceed given the pandemic. When I'm teaching my own students, when I have a class that I'm teaching, I think about what does it mean to have an empathetic, and in my world, I use the word humanizing practice, the term humanizing practice quite a bit. What does it mean? How does that show up? And for me, that shows up in how I create space for students and myself to share whatever it is we're thinking and feeling, to provide human connection and support for one another, understanding that we have to go about doing the work of the curriculum and learning. So I think in these times, it's relationships and support are so important. And so I would say that is a really important dimension of ethical leadership right now, to just show empathy and concern and give people a space to really to express how they're doing, how they're feeling, and how they can move forward with their shared work.
Thanks, Alison. Donald, does that answer your question? Have you got anything you'd like to add in following that?
No, thank you. That's useful, and to hear the importance of empathy and relationship building. I think it's really important we don't lose touch of that, alongside sometimes a bit of a clamour around attainment and unhelpful phrases like lost learning and so on. We've got to be really careful, I think, that we foreground those relationships as we're moving forward. So thanks very much, Alison and Andy. That's really useful to hear that.
Thanks, Donald. I see there's a comment in the chat being Natalie White. I wonder, Natalie, if you'd like to come in and just kind of expand on your thoughts and your comment, if you'd like to come in.
Sorry, trying to find my. Oh, there we go.
That's all right.
Trying to find them on mute buttons. Yeah, no, really, it was just that I see this, you know, the equity thing as being something that was around before it was coined and before it was grabbed by the attainment agenda, and equity of, you know, learning and the opportunity of, there's quite often a kind of hidden curriculum within the school building. You know, the way that we, you know, before a child starts to learn, they've got to sit down, they've got to have taken their coat off, they've got to have their hat off, they've got to look at the teacher, they've got to hold their pencil, and particularly working with younger children, I've seen this time and time again where they can't learn within the classroom. We take them into an outdoor space and do exactly the same kind of learning. So show me, you know, the first letter of your name in natural materials, and you suddenly get that engaged learner. And that to me is a real opportunity and in a real kind of a way to see equity. It's opening that access that everybody should be able to engage with it. And I think it actually summed up in the picture that keeps getting put about, you know, the one with the three children in the boxes and then the fence, you know, and I keep saying, just take away the fence. That's the barrier that's stopping us. And quite often it's, you know, it doesn't come down to gender or race, or it comes down to treating each child as an individual. And if you view every single child that's in front of you as an individual, you're going to be able to meet that equity much easier, because you're seeing what it is that they need to help them learn. And I think it's really important that we keep, you know, we don't tie up equity as being just about raising attainment and then closing the gap. It's about allowing every individual to achieve, I suppose, and have the opportunity to learn.
Thanks, Natalie. Alison, your thoughts on Natalie's comment?
Yes, I thank you for that bit of background, Natalie. This idea that equity somewhere along the way got sort of harnessed to closing the achievement gap. And so I guess in response, I'm wondering, you know, what understandings people had about equity and achieving equity before this sort of focus on achievement gaps. And you know that these are often measured by standardized tests. So that would be really interesting to think about and to see how it compares to sort of where the nation is now, to think about this time of crisis and what equity could mean now. And also, I appreciate this sort of individualized focus on each child. I would say that's a yes and, right? Because focusing on each child means that you attend to all of the different facets of identity that contributes to how a student thinks and how they respond to materials, how they engage in materials, and all of that. But we have to also understand that those identities are shaped by their cultural groups, by their families of origin, and all of that. And so at the same time as we sort of recognize each person as an individual, we have to also understand them as nested or informed or shaped by these different socialization groups that are often delineated by culture and language and race and all of that. And I think if we do this both and approach, we can then start thinking more, it could open us up to thinking about what are some additional resources or ways that I can tap into that student or engage that student based on what I know about their cultural background, their community, and that sort of thing.
Thanks, Alison. Andy?
Yeah, just terrific contribution, Natalie, that I absolutely appreciate, and I think all of us will. And to tie it to Haley Barr, who comes next, it is in the paradox is in recognizing that everybody's an individual. One thing you need is knowledge. You need knowledge of LGBT issues. You need, in other countries, you need knowledge of indigenous oppression. You need knowledge of transnationalism and everything that involves. So some of it is, you know, our kind of eternal commitments to being responsive to everybody we're working with, but part of that is the knowledge that you bring to that. And in Ontario, which is where a lot of our research data comes from, part of the curriculum and the books and the texts we use is about making that knowledge available to kids in an effortless way. So from quite a young age, you'll see many kind of parents in text, sometimes one parent, sometimes gay parents, sometimes no parents at all. And all those are represented in the text, and they're represented quite effortlessly, not as a debating point, not as a point of controversy, and you will see even from the age of about 8 in Ontario, children are taught in a very matter-of-fact way about the history of what we have here called, what we've had until well into the 1980s, which were residential schools that forcibly separated children from the parents and the language and the culture and their identity, and physically and sometimes often sexually abuse them. And apart from that last element, from the age of 8, children are taught this. Children are taught that this is what happened to, and what the legacy of that is in lots of ways. So so putting all these issues into the curriculum, trying to I'm not saying losing the controversy, but doing this in a matter-of-fact way. You know, if anybody ever says to me, what do we do about gender-neutral bathrooms? I say, well, go on an airline. They've had gender-neutral bathrooms ever since they started. Like nobody's been demanding male and female bathrooms on British Airways, as far as I know. So, you know, just have courage, have common sense, and embed and weave these things into the curriculum, including the materials that you construct for your own curriculum as well. And I think that's really to build on what Natalie was talking about, and in a way that connects with Harry's additional important question. Allison, yeah, what do you have to add to that? I can hear somebody typing, by the way. Now.
Can I just ask, if you're not speaking or been presenting or asked to come forward, can you just mute, please? Thank you. So, Alison, do you have anything to add? Sorry to that.
Well, you know, I know we have other questions that we want to get to, so I will just underscore Andy's comment about continuously learning, because no teacher will ever fully know the full backgrounds of their students. I want to just emphasize this idea of inquiry into identities, who we are, as a wonderful way to start learning about who your students are and pointing you to what do I need to kind of dig into further in terms of my own knowledge base in order to make those curriculum connections so students can see themselves, not just in the curriculum, but also in the extracurricular activities and all of that of the school. So again, Natalie, thank you so much for your question and your thoughts.
And I've just made one brief addition to all this. In all these questions, don't forget that social class remains a very important source of marginalization, disadvantage, oppression even. And so let's not ditch social class in order to take on these other aspects of exclusion and diversity, but bring them together, because what the populists in the UK have done very well, read Deborah Mattison's book, Beyond the Red Wall, which is about why nobody votes Labour anymore in Stoke-on-Trent, Darlington or Accrington, where I come from. And why everybody started voting Conservative. And that was because the populists were able to speak volubly to people's class identity against other identities. And it was the failure of Labour to continue to recognise class identity at the same time as it was embracing these other identities that opened that space for the populists to come in and really preach hate and division. So we have to keep class alongside these other sorts, not kind of say, well, we're done with that now. We need to look at these other things.
Thanks, Andy. We've actually got a question around which picks up on the curriculum from Anne McIntosh. So Anne, if you'd like to unmute and come into the conversation with your question.
Yes, hi there, thanks very much. I mean, you've actually probably answered quite a bit of what I was concerned about. I work with new leaders a great deal, and there is definitely conflict for them around the pressure that comes from not politicians but political influences that are around us at the moment, and they're in conflict about maintaining what we need, as you've described, as a really balanced and an open, inclusive curriculum. And how can we encourage and support them to resist that pressure? Part of it is around the catch-up agenda, the narrative that's becoming quite populist is actually exactly what I feel.
Allison?
Sure. I think one really important understanding for these folks who are where these pressures are coming from is that there's not an either or in terms of an inclusive and responsive curriculum and a curriculum that helps support students' academic growth in ways that are that show up on literacy and numeracy tests. So I would say a great point of sort of equipment is the research that shows that when students their experiences, their backgrounds, and what they know, who they are used in ways that help them learn the curriculum, that students actually fare quite better when they, as Andy was talking about, are sort of introduced to a variety of texts, literature that represents different kinds of life experiences, and they have opportunities to choose ones in which they can see themselves. Then those cognitive strategies of making these connections and the background knowledge that students think, all the things that we know that support students' reading comprehension, for example, speaking as a literacy person, we know that all of those things are enhanced by tapping into who students are and what we know about them. So I think there's some education that needs to be done. I think oftentimes when we think about an inclusive curriculum or a diverse curriculum, it means that we're abandoning the literacy skills and the other curriculum that, or the other dimensions of curriculum that we are responsible for, and we do want to develop those in our students. They're extremely important for their academic and social mobility, but it's a way of learning how to ensure that students and who they are represented in the curriculum that is also informed by policy and what needs to be included in a particular curriculum in a way that helps support students' growth, and then sort of educating the ones applying pressure to how we are covering the curriculum, but we're doing it in a way that is inclusive, because that's best practice for supporting students' learning, actually.
Thanks, Allison. Andy?
I think what I'd love to hear now, if we have a couple of minutes, is about 3 or 4 comments from different people in the group, and then perhaps in the short time we have left, Alison and I might make a few closing remarks related to those. So just a bunch of they might be questions, or they might just be comments and observations. How would that be, David?
Yeah, that's fine. I know that we've got a question from Miriam. So I don't know if Miriam would like to maybe come in and just ask her question, and then we would encourage everyone to put comments in or questions. This is your chance. We've got Andy and Alison with us, so take the opportunity to ask questions and comments. But we'll bring in Miriam.
Hi, David. Thanks. My question is around, moving out with education. How do you suggest that a whole local authority system best builds that shared approach to ethical leadership across the many different sectors, housing, benefits? Where do we start building that awareness of what you've spoken about, the intersectional realities? How do we start to build that shared language and know that we've got shared expectations? So moving with education and then across a local authority.
Thanks, Miriam. Andy?
Thanks, Miriam. So thanks. Yeah, it's the answers are easy to say, but much harder to do. So, one is a clear, obvious one is the politics of representation. So, however your policies affect, are they included in co-creating those policies? So, if you have policies about newcomers, for example, which is a term I'm very ambivalent about, but let's just call them newcomers for the moment. People who are living new in Scotland. But remember, remember that doesn't mean they've given up where they are. In their heads, they're still belonging to two or more places. Are they? How and in what ways are those newcomers represented in helping you shape the policies together? Over time, what do your recruitment policies look like in terms of diversity and inclusion? And again, I don't forget social class here. People who've grown up in poverty, hardship, and so on. That is important too. So these are obvious things. It would be interesting to have everybody's photos on here, but I suspect not many people would look more like Allison than they look like me. And that's not to blame anyone. It is just to say we're in the middle of a big generational change within Scotland, and we need to really pay attention to who's in front of the children, who's in front of the teachers, who's in front of the public. So that's a simple way to begin. It doesn't answer everything, by any means, and I know that Allison will come along with 2 or 3 more things now after that.
Took me a moment there to find my unmute button. So I think in terms of I'll just say I had a few thoughts here in terms of thinking about what are the different sort of segments or institutions, if you will, or organizations that address different components of people's daily life and well-being. Where do they find resources and support? Who are the organizations that are working together, and what might it mean to have a multi-pronged approach where we are bringing together people who are doing the same kind of work across the regional authorities, and how can we think together about this charge, this task of being more inclusive in our practices in the work that we do. I think there is some, obviously, we've talked about learning that needs to go on, and so because the poverty, the social class angle has been so predominant in the UK, not just in Scotland as a country, and as Andy rightly says, we do not want to lose a focus on that. In fact, race and poverty are very highly strongly correlated in the US and in other diverse countries. But then what might it look to bring together system leaders, school leaders, teacher leaders to start having these conversations? And then how do we share our thinking towards sort of developing a sort of coherent plan? So it's as you would expect it to be. It's involved. It takes time. But I think bringing together different stakeholders who are familiar with the work each other is doing, and who can be informed and equipped with some ways, some learning around these concepts and issues and what we're trying to achieve as a whole. I think some really good thinking and ideas can come from that, that then leaders can sort of put together into a more coherent plan where we're working together, but perhaps everyone has a sort of a primary focus or charge or task, but they're supported by others doing the same kind of work that they are.
Thank you so much.
Yep, thank you. Thanks, Miriam, for the question. So I suppose it comes back as well to Donald's point earlier about that kind of leader and making the space to have those kind of conversations and not getting caught up in that kind of operational. So that the real challenge at the moment are the pressures, I suppose, that people might find themselves under, but the importance of creating that space to bring those groups together, to have those conversations which need to happen. I wonder about confidence, I suppose, of those leaders to have those conversations, and how confident people feel to have them. And maybe that's a challenge to something to consider. And also, I suppose, a conversation about system. You know, we talk about the system, but I wonder how clear we are about what do we mean by the system within Scotland? Who's included within that system? Where does it start? Where does it stop? And that kind of wider aspect, we talk about the education system, but actually what we need to be talking about, because quite a few authorities in Scotland have children's services, so bringing wider groups together. But that's another kind of piece of work to be done as well, to explore that. I wonder, there's a question from Hayley for Andy about, well, I'll let invite Hayley to come in actually, just as a kind of final question before we have kind of final comments and thoughts. So Hayley, would you like to come in? We can't hear you, Hayley. Don't know if you're... No, microphone's not working, I don't think. So,
yeah, I did answer this in the chat box, David.
Oh, sorry, right, okay. Yeah.
I mean, it's a short answer, but you know, it's the beginning of an answer.
So fact and science versus fake. And actually, I suppose, what is the impact of social media and tech? You know, we were talking about these challenges that are faced, and you know, you're talking about Labour and talking about the populist kind of. What impact does social media and technology have on these debates and discussions? Andy, Allison?
Yeah, so we agreed I would talk last since Allison talked first, but I'm quite happy just to go with the flow here. So Allison, you'll get you as you will do superbly, the closing word. If you go to worldwideweb.Chenin, CHENIN, like Chenin Blanc, but with an E, chenin.ca. There you'll find we have a centre at the University of Ottawa on ethical technology with a group of 6 faculty, which I set up during the pandemic. And we have a charter there, a 10-point charter for ethical use of technology. And I'm not going to go through the 10 points of that charter now, but 2 things to pay attention to are technology in the way it's set up and operates is already hugely biased. It is the large technology corporations are, first of all, overwhelmingly at the top levels run by white men, and they reflect that. They reflect that in what their driving forces are. So the driving forces are often the algorithms and the profitability. What do algorithms do? They reinforce our preferences. You go on Amazon, you'll see your preferences. You go on Netflix, you'll see your preferences. You go on Spotify, you'll see your preferences. In reinforcing preferences, they also reinforce prejudices, which is they insulate people from one another. So the people who led the assault on the Capitol, participated in it in the US, are engaging with a whole different set of media and social media than people who didn't, for example. So one thing we talk about in the and even the dominance of the English language on the internet is highly exclusionary of many other, indeed every other linguistic group. And so one of the things we talk about in the Charter is every school, every local authority, every country, and every technology company should establish a committee to identify and manage risks of technology, embrace the benefits, which are considerable, but also examine and deal with the risks. And what are they? Just, these are not all of them, but I'll just go through a few. Digital addiction, reinforcement of prejudices and algorithms, anxiety amongst adolescent girls in particular, worried about their kind of image and appearance, cultural bias. So you'll see some kind of content very available educationally, and controversial content, for instance, about race, just not nearly so available. And so every school needs, and there's such enormous money after the pandemic around transformational change in technology, and almost none behind transformational change in nature, even though the evidence is much more positive about the effect of nature on learning than it is about the effect of technology on learning. So schools will really have to be the drivers to identify the risks as well as the opportunities, and to establish some kind of balance so that one doesn't overwhelm the other.
Thanks, Andy. And I realise I've obviously kind of loaded that kind of question towards the end. So what we'll do, Alison, we'll have kind of final comments. And as we discussed, I think, Andy, if there's anything you want to add just to close us off and around the ethical leadership, because I'm going to just take a slightly different direction with the technology aspect there. So Alison, in terms of kind of final kind of thoughts around the conversation today, or anything you'd want to leave participants with that you think would be important for them, and then we'll go to Andy at the end.
Thanks, David. Well, I will say that I'm very encouraged to see that many people were part of this conversation today. And one thing that's very important coming up for me right now, and some of the questions alluded to that, is this idea of broad systemic and even beyond that sort of educational change at a national level, speaking of Scotland per se. And so it's so important that this work of ethical leadership does not occur in sort of silos or bubbles, or in particular places where people can sort of say, oh, well, of course they can lead in this way, because look at the student population that they have, or look at the parents or families that they're working in, or they need to attend to ethical leadership because they're serving these students. I want to leave us with the proposition that no matter where we teach and who we teach and who we lead, that ethical leadership is extremely important for all of us, and that part of ethical leadership is also this sort of informing and partnering and invitation to others who work in the same roles as you do and in different but supplementary roles as well to take up this question. So I would encourage that all of you that you continue these conversations, whether it's in these meeting spaces or and elsewhere. It's such an important topic. So I just want to thank everyone who's been here, and just to encourage you to keep the conversation going, because it is ethical that all students ultimately experience a school and a school system that from the bottom bottom up has the commitment to ethical leadership and educating from an ethical standpoint, really. It's just, I would argue, a human right.
Thank you, Alison. Andy, final thoughts from yourself?
Yeah, I just quickly just want to thank everyone for what you've done during this appalling pandemic. Thank you all as teachers, as leaders, as parents, actually, and your children too, for resilience, for imagination, creativity, and for professionalism, and the evidence is consistent with a number of other countries for actually becoming even more collaborative during this pandemic than you already were, and so thanks for that, and use that. Use everything you are and that you have become to take you forward beyond it.
Thanks, Andy, and thank you both so much for your time today. It's been hugely appreciated by all of us and the participants in particular, and thank you to them for their time today. A couple of things that have really resonated with me: Alison and our humanizing practice. I think that one's going to stick with a lot of us. What a lovely phrase, and how important that we consider that in all of our work. And Andy, the advice to have courage and common sense and weave this work into everything that we do in the curriculum. Such great words of advice and guidance for us as we really explore this in greater detail going forward. So thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute joy to be able to listen to you, and thank you for all our participants and their giving up their time and watch in a point in the term when I know everybody's absolutely exhausted. So it's been very good of you to come and join in, and hopefully we'll see you in another international session. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thanks. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you, Andy. Thanks, Alison.
Thank you.